It's time for the Comic Bin Comic Book Podcast. The podcast you look forward to for all of your news and reviews of the best comic books hitting stands. Whether it's DC,
Batman, Wonder Woman,
Marvel,
Spider-Man,
Image,
Spawn, Saga,
Boom,
Once and Future, Power Rangers,
or whatever book or publisher you follow.
we cover them all here.
This is the place for you.
That's right, it's for everyone.
This is the Comic Bin Comic Book Podcast.
Let's get it.
Hello, folks, and welcome to another episode of the Comic Bin Comic Book Podcast. I am your host, Theo, back again with another week, looking back at my favorite books from this past week. Got another 5 that I'm gonna drop for you, and then of course we're gonna have our honorable mentions as well. So let's just go on and jump right into those reviews. In the number 5 spot, we have the Moon Knight Annual 2024 number 1. This is a annual that has 2 stories in it. The main story is written by Dan Waters with art from Marco Rina, with a backup from Derek Landry with art from Valentina Penty. Now, this annual, like the other annuals that have been out as of late, is a part of the Infinity Watch event that's been going on, where these new Infinity Gems have picked out some new folks to be charged with them. And so in this issue, we're going to be looking at the Mind Stone. And the Mind Stone has selected Colleen Wing to be its holder. And in taking ownership of the Mind Stone, Colleen basically finds herself in this coma-like sleep, and she's admitted to this hospital. And with the Mind Stone attached to her, she is wandering into the minds of other people who are on this ward with her. And due to that, the souls of these individuals are cast out into forms of birds, and Moon Knight is somehow able to see them, and he follows them back to the hospital where he finds Colleen. And knowing everything that's going on, the next thing you know, he finds himself unconscious, asleep as well. And there we see that Colleen is kind of being terrorized. She is being chased by Nightmare, the Lord of Nightmares, who wants the Mind Stone for himself and wants to use it, of course, for nefarious ways and to take over the universe with the Mind Stone, and then just able to cast nightmares upon everyone. And it's a really good story in that while it focuses on Colleen, it also focuses on Moon Knight. And what you see is that, unlike the other residents of the hospital that had their souls and their minds cast out as Colleen went from person to person, it doesn't happen with Moon Knight. And he figures that the reason why this is the case is because of his multiple personalities. And we see where Nightmare meets Moon Knight's other two personalities. He meets Jake Lockley, he meets Stephen Grant, and they beat the hell out of him. And, he thinks he can get an upper hand, but he doesn't. They really, because of how traumatized the mind of Mark Spector is, he's unable to do to Moon Knight what he's typically able to do. And they basically are able to cast Nightmare out into the real world. But in doing so, it also allows Mark to wake up Colleen, and he casts her out of his mind just as easy as Jake and Steven cast Nightmare out of Mark's mind as well. But doing that allows Colleen to wake up. She's able to face Nightmare and, basically destroy him. And it was a really good story. I really enjoyed it. But in the end, she is becoming more attuned and as far as what she needs to do with regards to learning the Mind Stone. But little do she and Mark Spector know that they are being watched. They're being watched by Star. And so we will see how that continues to play out as the saga continues. Now, the backup of the backup of it focuses on the Death Stone. That one, again, written by Derek Landry with art by Valentina Pinti. And it focuses on Phil Coulson. Coulson has been chosen as the welder of the Death Stone, and he basically, he appears as the avatar of death, at least to this one guy who's in the hospital, and he thinks that he is meeting the Grim Reaper. And it's a very good story. I enjoyed the main story, of course, better, just focusing on Moon Knight. This one didn't have anything to do with Moon Knight at all in the second story. Again, it focuses strictly on the saga with the various Infinity Stones. But it was a good story. The art in both stories were really good for what they needed to do. Looking at the Mind Stone and going in and out of dreams. We had different palettes of colors. And then in the second story, it was really dark. Again, we're looking at an individual who think he's about to die and think he's meeting the Grim Reaper. And so there's just this great palette of black and gray for Phil as he meets this gentleman in the hospital before realizing that, he is alive and he's talking to Nick Fury as well. But again, great story. Enjoyed them both. The main story, of course, was the better one. Can't wait to see how this ends up. But that is the Moon Knight Annual #1. 2 stories, part of the Infinity Watch saga. Main story written by Dan Waters with art from Marco Arena. And the backup story written by Derek Landry with art by Valentina Pinti over at Marvel Comics. Next up, staying over at Marvel Comics, we get to the Ultimates #4. Ultimates #4, written by Dennis Camp with art from Phil Noto. This story focuses almost completely on Doom, aka Reed Richards, and we get a lot of backstory going into, Reed as a kid, Reed as a young adult growing up and meeting those that would have become the Fantastic Four. We get to see Reed captured by the Maker and how history is rewritten to where those that would become his brethren in the Fantastic Four don't make it. Johnny dies, Sue dies, Ben kills himself. We see just the torment and everything that Reed experiences in the past under the watchful eye of the Maker, and how he is torturing him with everything to make him the character of Doom. And we also see, with these backstories, how he truly loved his friends. He loved Sue, of course, and Johnny and Ben, and just, the Reed Richards that we see on Earth 616, the one who is sure of himself, but who also has some confidence issues, who was always checking and rechecking his calculations, and when something goes on and he's questioning himself again. So there are those tidbits of the Reed Richards that we know that exist with the Reed that will eventually become Doom. And so again, we get that backstory, and we get the backstory of the torture from the Maker. But in the present, we see that Doom is trying to recreate everything that created the cosmic storm that is supposed to create the Fantastic Four. And in typical Reed Richards fashion, all of the things that he's doing to try to recreate what would become the Fantastic Four fails, and he's using mice for this to happen, and they're just dying left and right. And all of this is happening, and Tony Stark is oblivious to all of them because of, what Reed is doing or what Doom is doing behind the scenes. So he doesn't know everything that's going on. And he tells Doom, hey, I want to help you. But Reed, who Doom is, wants to do this on his own. He is more than capable of fixing whatever it is that he is telling Tony that he's going to do or he's working on without any assistance. But you just see that he is terrorized and tortured. He's tortured more than anything with what he knows has happened to him, how he came to be, but also of what the Maker did to create the life that he now lives, as well as the life he was supposed to have. And so he really wants to bring that back. And we just see how he continues to struggle with the experiments of recreating the cosmic storm in order for it to happen. And it's just a great story. It's traumatic, just watching everything that happens to Reed and how he, with all of this torture that Maker is putting on him, makes him out to be the person that we now see in the Ultimate Universe as Doom. And great story. Again, you see just everything that he's going through and how he wants to do everything for the good and making sure that they can correct all that the Maker has done to their world. But with a great story, the art from Phil Noto and the colors are pretty much the same. I'm not going to comment too much, but I just want to say just how good this story has been thus far. And of all of the stories that have been out with the Ultimates, this one being number 4, it's the best of the of the series right now. And I'm saying that as a big fan of She-Hulk and considering what happened last issue in issue 3. But looking at what they are looking at doing for issue number 5, the cover for issue 5 seems to focus on Hawkeye. So we will see how that plays out. But again, truly enjoying everything that's going on with the new Ultimate Universe. Again, still enjoying Ultimate Spider-Man better than all of them. But this is in a close second behind that series. And again, that is The Ultimates number 4, written by Dennis Camp with art from Phil Noto over at Marvel Comics. Okay, so let's move on over to Image Comics for my number 3 book. The number 3 book for this week is Public Domain number 8, written and drawn by Chip Zdarsky. And we got a couple of things going on in this issue, as always, when we are looking at the lives of the Dallas family and things going on with Jerry and the folks over at Singular Comics. So the story begins where they are interviewing folks to take up the positions of colorist and letterer for the Domain. And we see it's Sid and Dave and Cynthia that are doing these interviews. Tanya and Miles are not involved since it's more on the artistic side. And we see a we see a bunch of characters that are interviewing for this role, or for these roles of colorist and letterer. And Dave just really kind of takes control of the situation with the hiring of both individuals, even without getting feedback from his dad. And Cynthia's quite okay with it. She is a fan of the work, and the letterer is the real funny one of the group, because the letterer, when they look for examples of the lettering style that could fit into a superhero comic, she points out of the window and shows them where there's spray paint, there's graffiti on this building that has been created, and it's just beautiful, but it fits into what they're looking for with regards to superhero lettering, and the pows and the bangs that you may see in a superhero comic. And again, Dave, just for some reason, he has a thing for certain types of women who seems to be controlling. He's crazy about Cynthia. The colorist also seems to be this strong, demanding, long hair, don't care type of character. And it's the same for the letterer. So Dave, again, he takes control, and because of his personality and who he gels with, he plays the main role in picking both of these characters, or both of these individuals, to join the Dallas team in creating the new version of the domain. And it's just a great experience and a great interaction between the five of those, the new colorist, the new letterer, and then Sid, Cynthia, and Dave. Now, Singular is doing their own thing, and Jerry is now pleading with his sister, who runs the company, that they need to go in a different direction, particularly because Jerry reveals that he knows what the Dallas team are doing with regard to creating this new version of the domain with 3 characters, 2 of them being women, especially people of color, women of color. And he puts his sister in a pickle, because he basically says, hey, that means if they create all these new characters, we won't be able to do the same thing. And so she tells him, hey, you need to get started on some new ideas that we can use to beat these guys out. I'll work with the lawyers. You get started on the creative side. And so, there's a lot going on now. In that interaction between Jerry and his sister, again, he reveals that, they're creating these new characters. And he basically says, I know this because, they're not keeping it a secret with all of the people that's been going throughout the studio. And but I ultimately think that they may have a leak amongst the team. And I'm kind of winding it down to 3 individuals. One being Cynthia, who I do not think it is. The other 2 being, and I can't remember the kid's name, who actually owns the building, who is the primary investor in Dallas Comics. And then the other person who I think might be the leak, unfortunately, might be Candy. Candy being Sid Dallas's wife. And so, if you can remember from issue 7, when Jerry and Sid kind of had it out, Jerry had no problem mentioning Candy by name, and it makes me wonder whether or not some hanky panky may have happened, if not right now, in the past between those two. But I ultimately think that there may be a leak that is going on because Jerry just knew a little bit too much as far as what the folks at Dallas are doing with creating this new version of the domain. Now, a couple of good things happened as well in this issue. One, well, the team at Dallas, thanks to the connections that Cynthia has, they are invited to that world's version of San Diego Comic-Con, and it is called San Diego Comic Expo. But they're invited to do a panel on this new domain that they're going to announce. But in order to cover the cost of doing this, they have to put out an ashcan copy of at least the first few pages of issue number 1. So that means they really got to get to work on getting some pages completed. Now, the other thing that is good is that they get their first paycheck. And to Miles's credit, what he does is he visits his ex, who he kind of swindled out of money to cover his gambling debts. He's an addict when it comes to gambling. And so he takes the check that he received from Cynthia and he goes to his ex-girlfriend and he pays her back the money that he took from her, which she is very appreciative of. But what Miles doesn't know is that he's being followed by what could be no more than a loan shark and his goons, who, he probably still owes money to. And in the end, the main boss, he says that, they're gonna pay Miles a visit, and they're gonna do it by showing up at Dallas Comics. So that's the way the issue ends. Again, I love the way that Chip Zdarsky is really moving this story along. Again, it has nothing to do, or I'll put it this way. You won't see anything that's going on in public domain directly in the domain, which is the series that's coming out next week with another issue. But what it really highlights is the trials, the tribulations, and just the life that folks within the industry go through with regards to putting a comic book together. And we see that in just this one issue, they go through a lot with regards to interviewing and hiring. It's not as easy as, say, a DC or a Marvel Comics, who just have access to a slew of creators, be it writers, be it artists, be it letterers, be it colorists, who they can, look at a project and say, hey, let's get this guy in. Hey, let's get this lady in. These folks are starting things from the ground up, and they have to go out there and pound the pavement to find the right fit for what they want to do with putting the new domain together. And that was a great piece. That was a great interaction between the entire team. Even after the hires were done, we see where Miles and the colorist kind of go back and forth. She's like, you just tell me what to do, but don't tell me how to paint. You put your words on the page. I won't tell you what to do with that. Don't tell me how to paint and how to put these pages together once I have everything from Dave. And you see Dave try to play the mediator of it all, and he's kind of done that throughout this this new volume of the series. And I like the character, again, as crazy as he is with the life that he's lived and continues to live. He seems to be the chill guy of the group, so can't wait to see what happens next. Chip Zdarsky's just been doing a wonderful job with this series, bringing it back for this second volume and then introducing us to the comic itself that the folks at Daleks Comics are putting together. Again, that issue is going to be out next week, but since there are no backstories in this, we've seen in the previous issues when there's been a backstory or when there is a vision of a panel from the domain, we see that he's had guest artists on the issue, which has primarily been Rachel Stott, who is the artist on the domain. But we haven't had any backstories in this issue, so the art is strictly from Chip Zdarsky himself. So there's not much more new that I can comment on the art style. It is what it is, just as with all of the previous issues. But again, it continues to be a great series. Absolutely love it. The only reason why it's not my book of the week is just that the top two were just better with what I enjoy. And so, again, still a great series. Pick it up if you're not reading it. Again, my number 3 book for the week, Public Domain number 8, written and drawn by Chip Zdarsky over at Image Comics. Coming in at the number 2 spot, we head back to Marvel Comics. They actually had a good week with me this week. They are in 3 of the 5 spots for this week. Exceptional X-Men number 1, written by Eve L. Ewing, with art from Carmen Carnero. So this is another of those stories coming from out of the ashes after the fall of Krakoa. And this one, so when I posted the original story of when this series was announced, this miniseries was announced, and I saw that it was focusing on the lead of Kitty Pryde as well as Emma Frost, I knew that I would be picking it up, considering Kitty is one of my favorite X-Men after Magneto, and you cannot pick up something that has Emma Frost front and center on the cover. So I knew I was going to pick it up, and I knew that I would at least get through the first issue. But what I did not know was that I would enjoy this as much as I did. So in this issue, Kitty, who in the beginning is still going by Kate or Catherine Pryde, she is trying to live as normal a life as possible. She is doing whatever it is that she can do to make her forget about everything that occurred on Krakoa. She has a job working at this bar. She just keeps herself busy. She doesn't want to do anything that will allow her mind to wander and to think back about the past and all that she has gone through with the whole Krakoa saga and the people that she's lost and those who are still around and the aftermath of all that has happened and how mutants are still being treated after the fall of Krakoa. And so she just wants to live a normal human life. And so she moves in with an old schoolmate of hers, and again, she just tries to live this life. And so living life also includes having a social life. And so she was supposed to be going on this date to a concert, and come to find out, she went on the wrong day. And before she is able to leave, she comes across a mutant who is being basically harassed by the security guard. And this mutant goes by the name of Trista. And, she was trying to get into the concert. She had a ticket. She was there with friends. The security guard wouldn't let her in because of her being a mutant. And it's just a bad experience, to the point to where the interaction between Trista and the security guard activates her mutant ability, and he goes to shoot her. And her ability, it allows her to turn her skin into this metallic bronze form. And that's how she will eventually have the name of Bronze. But, Catherine tries to avoid this. She goes to leave and said, no, this is beyond me. I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not an X-Men anymore. Nope. But when she sees the security guard pull this gun and attempt to shoot Trista, it brings out the best of Catherine. It brings out the best of Kate, and she goes in. She saves Trista by phasing her through the wall, and they take off through the concert, trying to get away from not just this security guard, but other security guards that have now been called to track them down. And so eventually, Catherine and Trista gets to Kate's car, and they're driving off. And at some point, Catherine becomes Kitty again, which I am so happy about. I was never a fan of her being called Kate, although I knew the reason why she went by that name, which she picked up during the Marauder series that was going on through the time of Krakoa. But I'm happy that Catherine is Kitty again. But just a great story. I really enjoyed how this focus on Kitty exploring herself, attempting to live a normal life, and realizing that no matter what, she is still an X-Men at heart. And again, she realizes that as well when she goes and she saves Trista. And Trista, of course, she pays her gratitude to Kitty by sending her this gift box the next day. And Trista's just this happy-go-lucky teenage girl, and I love how Eva Ewing gives her this voice as this youngster who just wants to hang with her friends, do teenage girl stuff, and she's just a youngster. And so you would think that after all of that the story ends. But it doesn't, of course, because again, you can't have Emma Frost on a cover of an X-Men title and not have Emma make an appearance. And she does at the end. So again, we know from the other stories that are around that there's X Factor that's being led by Angel and now Havoc. We know that there's this new X-Men team that's being led by Scott. But Emma's doing Emma things, and she is trying to find a new team, or those that can kind of help her with her own cause. And she is just psychically connecting to mutants all over to see who's out there, who's available, and who might fit into whatever it is she's planning. And she's planning something. But then she settles on Kitty, and she finds her, and she probes her, and she realizes that she is not trying to be found, but the issue ends with her saying, "You can't hide from me." So we know that those two are going to be leading this new team of X-Men who are all going to be new characters. We got introduced to the first one with this issue being Trista. We are going to be introduced to the second one in the next issue, and I believe that's going to be Melee before we get introduced to the third. But I love this introduction to the series in how it not only introduces us to these new characters and how it's going to be used to introduce us to these new characters, but I truly enjoyed the focus on Kitty and Kitty becoming Kitty again as she made this transition from Kate to Kitty Pryde again. And so I am definitely going to be keeping up with this series. I truly enjoyed it. The art from Carmen Carnero was really good. She also did the cover for the main cover for the issue. If there was any gripe that I had from an artistic standpoint, was that the main cover for issue number 1 was basically a reprint of a variant cover. So the main cover for Exceptional X-Men number 1 was basically a lighter version of a variant cover that was put out during Rise of the Powers of 10. It was from the last issue, and they called it the Foreshadow issue. And again, it was just basically these characters, including Emma and Kitty, same poses, except they were in the shadows. And not a fan of that. I just feel that was kind of cheap. I understand why it was done. They were foreshadowing the coming of this new team. I just wish something else was done. I understand the foreshadow to now being in the light, but I just felt that was kind of cheap for Marvel. But other than that, truly enjoyed this issue. I will definitely be following this along. Got a review up on the site. Came in at a 7.5. Probably would have been higher had it not been that issue with the cover that I had. But again, fun story. Truly enjoyed how we are reintroduced to Kitty and how she makes her way back into being Kitty again. And I also appreciate that each issue seems to be focusing on the introduction of these 3 new characters to the Exceptional X-Men world. But again, that is Exceptional X-Men number 1, written by Evel Ewing, with art from Carmen Carnero over at Marvel Comics. So we now get to our top spot, my favorite comic for this past week, and maybe a surprise, maybe not, but it is the Trinity Special, World Finest number 1, written by Tom King with art by Belen Ortega. Yes, I have another Tom King book as my top book for the week. Write it down, mark this period in history for future reference. But this is a collection of the backup stories from Tom King's Wonder Woman series, and this covers issues 6 through 12, which is parts 4 through 9 of the World Finest story that he is doing, that focuses on Lizzie Prince, who is Wonder Woman's daughter, and her interactions with John Kent and Damian Wayne. And the main story notwithstanding, the backup stories alone are enough for me to pick up each issue of Tom King's run on Wonder Woman. But the main issues of Wonder Woman have been really, really good as well, and I've enjoyed both main stories as well as the backup stories. But I am not going to dwell too much into what goes on in each of the stories, other than to say that they really gel in how they're put together in just telling the story from Lizzie as a child up to Lizzie as a teenager up to Lizzie as a young adult. I think by the time we get to the Mongrel story, she may be 17, 18 years old, but it's just a real good journey, and how Damien and John just struggle with the fact that they are her caretaker, that Diana has trusted them to watch over her as she grows into a young woman, and how they truly become a team, this new Trinity, quote unquote Trinity of Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman. But it's just a lot of hilarity, it's just really good. If you ever want to get a crack and just laugh your butt off reading a story, this will do it. Whether it's Damien just falling head over heels over Black Canary and just, becoming a canary along with Lizzie, or the final story of the issue where they are going off to face this new Mongo who is supposed to be all powerful, and they take him out with one punch, and it took them 72 days of just being together on this ship, and just the hilarity of that. There is nothing within this story that just doesn't make you laugh when you look at the interaction between Lizzie and John and Damien. And what it really does, although the focus is on Lizzie and her growth, but it really brings back what I missed with Super Sons, in how Damien and John are just always at each other, particularly Damien, coming up with every snide name that begins with an S that he can come up for John. And, John just being his dad's son. But it's just great interaction with all three. Tom King has done a really good job in telling this story. And again, like I said, the Woman series has been really good as well. So I'm not going to take that from him either. But, the backup stories have really been what I really look forward to whenever an issue of Wonder Woman comes out. And you can tell that when we talk about it on the Batman Universe Comic Podcast as well. So the art from Belen Ortega is just superb. The main cover is done by Daniel Sampere, who does the main cover and artwork for the main Wonder Woman story. So it's just a good, everything that you would love. If you are a fan of the Super Sons, you need to be reading this, and throwing Lizzie into this quote unquote conundrum with John and Damien, and just the interaction between those three is just hilarious at best, and just fun at a minimum. But I look forward to seeing how this will continue on, because after you get through those chapters, we get a 2-page preview of what's to come in the backup stories of Wonder Woman, that again will continue to focus on John, Damien, and Lizzie. But it looks like they're going to have their own version of a crisis, coming with the next phase of World's Finest. And so I am all on board for reading that and keeping up and continuing on with this saga of the new World's Finest, being Lizzie Prince, Damian Wayne, and John Kent. But again, that is the Trinity special, World's Finest #1 from Tom King and Belen Ortega. My book of the week from DC Comics. All right, so before closing things out for this episode, let's take a look at our honorable mention. This week I only have 2. First up, in our honorable mention, we have Scarlett #4, written by Kelly Thompson with art from Marco Ferrari. We continue Scarlett's infiltration into the Arashikage and her mission to bring back Jinx. And we see here that they make their connection and they're happy to see each other. But there's a whole bunch of stuff that's going on. And we see that, at least as of now, that the Arashikage and Cobra are not on the same page. You know, they are actually fighting Cobra over this weapon that Storm Shadow eventually gets his hands on, that's called the Sword of Life. But good story. Really enjoy what's going on with anything that's in the Energy universe right now. So that's my honorable mention, at least my first honorable mention. And then my final honorable mention for this week is the final issue of The Boy Wonder over at DC Comics, written and drawn by Juni Ba. Again, this coming-of-age story with Damian Wayne and who he was as a child raised by the League of Assassins to who he is now as the son of Batman and the brother of the Robins. And great way that Juni Ba brought this story to an end. I really wasn't expecting it, but I was happy with it. I don't think it's a Damian Wayne we'll ever see in continuity, but it is a Damian Wayne that I can live with in this universe that he's created. But I really enjoyed it. But that is my second honorable mention for this week. The Boy Wonder #5, written and drawn by Juni Ba over at DC Comics. So that is going to do it for this week's episode. Next week, I'm not sure if I'm going to have an episode next week, only because I'm supposed to be traveling. I may not be back in time to get a recording done. However, if I am able to do so, these are the titles that I'm going to be looking at. First up, we're going to be looking at Transformers #12 over at Image Comics from Daniel Warren Johnson and Jorge Corona. Green Lantern #15 over at DC Comics from writer Jeremy Adams with art from Fernando Pasarin. Then, staying at DC, Batman and Robin #13 from Joshua Williamson with art from Juan Ferrara. It is the final issue of Joshua Williams' run. I am so sad to see him leave the series. Absolutely love what he's done with bringing Batman and Robin back, so we'll see how things go as Damian seeks out blood from Bane for the death of Alfred Pennyworth. Then moving over to Marvel, I'm gonna be reading Vengeance of the Moon Knight #9, written by Jed McKay with art from Deb Pramanik. Staying at Marvel, gonna be looking at Avengers Assemble #1 from Steve Orlando with art from Corey Smith. Picking this up primarily because I want to see how they treat She-Hulk in this new series. I'm again hate the fact that they ended the sensational She-Hulk series. So I want to see how they take this on and see how they treat her. Going back over to Image, we have Geiger number 6, written by Jeff Johns with art by Gary Frank. Staying at Image, when you're doing The Domain number 3, written by Jeff Zdarsky with art from Rachel Stott. Then looking at Dark Horse, Prodigy, Slaves of Mars, number 2, written by Mark Millar with art from Stefano Landini. That's a good story. Edison is homeless and going through issues, but he found his brother, and so he's going to seek out help from his older brother. Then over at Dynamite, Space Ghost number 5, written by David Pepos with art from Jonathan Lau. This is the second part of the mini arc that looks at Space Ghost battling Zorak, and we'll see how that comes to an end. And then going over to Mad Cave, 2 stories I'm going to be reading over there. First up, Dark Empty Void, a new series written by Zach Kaplan with art from Chris Sheehan. And then finally, staying at Mad Cave, Gotcha Man number 3, written by Cullen Bunn with art from Chris Batista. And so we'll see the story, if you remember, from issue number 2. At the end of issue number 2, June, aka Swan, volunteered to go undercover as a member of the Devil Stars to try to find the whereabouts of the missing scientists. And so we get to issue 3, and so we'll see how that turns out. So again, another good slate of books that I will be picking up. Again, like I said, I don't know if I will be back in time to record an episode, but if I am, you know what I'll be looking at with regards to comics for the week. So happy to see what's going on, and hope I'm able to do another episode for you. That is going to do it for this episode of the Comic Ben Comic Book Podcast. I'd like to thank you all for your continued support of the program. The Comic Ben Podcast, as well as the Comic Book Spot, are a part of the Comic Book Source family of sites and media. You can follow the podcast on Twitter X at comic_Ben, or my personal account at BatmanFan_4Life. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, and Threads. We're all over social media. You can also follow our sister site over at thebatmanuniverse.net for all of your news and reviews in the world of Batman. Tune in next time as we give you more in the world of comic books. Again, we truly appreciate your support. But until we meet again next time, keep reading those comics.